sort of been involved from relatively early on with Jottnar, so we thought we'd like to push their new range as much as possible, because it carries on from where they've left off with last year's range, which is some of the best kit that we've ever seen produced for outdoor use, and we just thought we really should do a good job of supporting these guys, because they're relatively local and what they're doing is very, very different and really exciting. So, and it complements what we do throughout the rest of the shop very, very well. We're trying to be all-encompassing, a one-stop shop for as many different outdoor pursuits as we can cover, and a lot of users because of that, because they get into sea kayaks or some open canoes, some ice climbing kit, have a practice on our excellent ice wall there, and you know, just try the kit out in the shop and not be able to just go into an outdoor clothing shop or a water sports shop. We can cover everything, and all the staff that work here have been employed because they've got a lot of expertise. So Heather and Ellen over there have both worked and instructed in outdoors, and Emma, did I say Emma then? No, sorry Emma, I was getting mixed up. I've worked in outdoor centres. Ellen's been a Team GB water polo player and is now a top coach doing that. Dave's done first ascent to peaks. He was standing up now. First ascent to peaks in the Himalayas, and I've done a bit of climbing. So you know, everybody's got their kind of role and their expertise. So not for ourselves, we couldn't not choose to have the best kit in the shop. So at which point I'll hand you over to Tommy from Jottnar to tell you about the band.
Thanks very much, Chris. Good evening, folks. Thanks very much for taking the time to come over this way. I'm Tommy, and I'm one half of the company. And this guy over here in the blue jacket, this is Steve, and he's the other half of the company. The two of us, we comprise Jottnar. So, being as small as we are, very, very humbled and pleasantly surprised to see as many of you here tonight as there are. And it feels quite fitting to be standing here telling a bit of a story, actually in Up and Under. Chris didn't say that these guys were our very first stockist this time a year ago. And they were also the same guys who, maybe about 2 years ago, when we didn't even exist in physical terms, when we knocked on their door and Steve and I walked in and said, "You've never heard of us because we haven't launched yet. We're about to be an outdoor clothing company. Can we talk to you about a few ideas that we've got?" And to their credit, they didn't laugh at us and show us the street. And since that point onwards, we've had a really close relationship with these guys. So thanks for the kind words there, Chris.
They smirked a little bit.
Yeah, I know. What I thought I'd do tonight is maybe just take about 5 minutes or so and talk about the background to the company. Maybe just pull back the curtains a little bit and just talk about the creation of and what went into it, and then just use the opportunity to talk through some of the gear that we've got hanging up there on the shelves behind me. So myself and Steve, we've known each other for 10, 12, 15 years. We're both ex-Marines, and we were both in Arctic Norway with the Marines 6 years ago, which is where we used to go every winter. The Marines had a habit of sending us up to the frozen north to spend 3 months at a time playing soldiers and being cold. And it was when we were up there that the first conversation really began about what is now Jottnar. We're both climbers, skiers, mountaineers, so I suppose in a sense there was a natural progression from leaving the Marines to setting up an outdoor company. But there's obviously a very big question mark as to why two blokes would decide to create an outdoor clothing company in a market that I think anybody can see is particularly congested. It's very competitive. There's lots of brands out there doing similar things, and that really was our starting point. That was our rationale, precisely because of the congestion, the competitiveness, and the effects of those that we were seeing and we were feeling as consumers, as two blokes who have spent thousands of pounds on gear over the years, the effect that we saw and the effect that we felt was commoditisation of, in some senses, the outdoor sector. Ranges from brands that were so broad as to almost be indecipherable. Endless colours being produced season after season. In many cases, a lot of gear being sold in shops that resembled almost supermarkets in their scale, in their scope. And what we felt was that something that was so intrinsically formed and surrounded the mountains and the outdoors, something that should have soul, in many cases, this soul that we felt, it was absent. So that was our premise, that was our start point. And we thought, if we can create gear that in of itself is good enough and stands on its own 2 feet, it equals, if not exceeds, the current standards within this market, we might be onto something. If we can package it in a way that is focused and tells a story and makes sense, then we might be onto something. And if we can all bring it to life in a way that effectively puts that soul back into the company, that tells a story behind what we're trying to do, then we might be onto something here. So that was our premise a number of years ago. And I suppose, like all of these things, it starts with making that decision, making that commitment, and throwing yourself into it. We knew absolutely nothing about sourcing factories or the technicalities involved in designing gear. It was a complete unknown to the two of us. So we threw ourselves, we threw our time, we threw our money into the creation of the company. And over the course of about 18 months, we started designing, we started sketching, we brought in a freelance designer who is still with us to take from us our product that we'd sketched out in functional terms and to start to bring it to life in design terms. And at the same time as she was doing that, we were then passing these designs to our factories. We now have 2 factories, both of them in the Far East. And I say that as if that means nothing, whereas actually back in the time when we were making these considerations, we had absolutely no idea. How do you partner with a factory? It just seemed nuts. How do you do this? So it all began really as these things do, with a laptop on the kitchen table and Google. Factories. And really that is where it began, as basically as that. So we cast the net really wide. In the beginning, we thought in our naivety looking back that we'd be able to get all of this produced in the UK, and wouldn't that be a lovely story, and from a logistical perspective that would be great. But the problem is that you can't do this in the UK. There just isn't the capacity or the technical know-how, especially when you're welding and bonding in the way that we were obsessed with doing to a quality standard from the start. So we got to this point when we realised that we just couldn't pull this off in this country, and that was a real blow to us. We'd really invested an awful lot in this being a British manufacturing thing, and all of a sudden that wasn't going to happen. But in real terms, it didn't actually make a great deal, because it was all about the product, regardless of where it was made. So at the same time, we started sampling with factories in Europe and in China as well. And as a prototype started to come back, what became apparently immediately clear was that the craftsmanship in the Far East, in the Chinese factories, was head and shoulders above what we were able to get in the European factories that we were sampling with. And economically, it was a lot less expensive. So in many senses, the decision there made itself. So we thought this is where we're going to do it, clearly from a manufacturing purpose, a manufacturing perspective. But there's 8,000 miles between these factories and our kitchen table. This is going to be a bit of an epic. But actually, it wasn't at all, because of connectivity, because of obviously the internet. It's allowed us to pretty rapidly, with each product that we've made, with each prototype, to prototype. And basically, in simple terms, that's having the factory make up a very rough version of any given product. Then send it back to us via FedEx. It arrives on our doorstep a couple of days later. We then take it out into the field, we trial it, our pro team, they trial it, they try and tear it apart. We take that feedback, we then throw it back to the factory, by telephone, by email, by Skype. They then produce another prototype, and then 2 days later it turns up on our doorstep again. So despite what would seem to be, and what did seem to us at the time as being a huge, big obstacle in our way, actually it was something that was really, really workable and didn't present the obstacle that we thought at all. So after a period of development, of prototyping, we got to the point with launch being imminent, 2 or 3 months away. But of course, in order to launch, it requires you to produce all of your product in bulk, in the kind of orders, or the kind of volumes that you think people, complete strangers who have never heard of you, are going to buy. And it's also governed by minimums that the factories impose on you. And when they're used to dealing with the likes of, pick any other brand that you can see hanging on the wall here, tens of thousands, and we come along and we say, any chance you could knock up maybe 120 of us? There was a lot of negotiations going on there, and a lot of trying to bring these people on board, try and share the vision with them of what we were trying to do and bring them along for the journey. And some weren't having it, understandably, as businesses, and some were, and they were the ones that we partnered with. So we had that agreement in principle from the factories to do this for us, but of course it cost money to do that as well. We had enough in our pockets and in our piggy banks, Steve and I, to cover all of the branding, the design work, the website development. But of course it was, it was tens and low hundreds of thousands to actually go into production of the volume that we required. So that required us to bring cash into the business, and we did that the first time around by bringing on board effectively an angel investor, a private investor who bought into what we were trying to do, and with her cash, that then allowed us to go into production, cross the start line, which was October the 1st, 6 minutes past 12 last year, and begin selling our product online. So that was when we launched commercially, and we were doing it almost entirely online. And then maybe 2-3 weeks later, that's when we appeared on Up and Under's doorsteps again, this time with physical product, and sat through and talked through with them what was back then a very, very small and focused range. So I remember quite clearly going through all of the product with these guys, and it all seemed to be going pretty well. And then at the end, Chris stood up and he said, well, this all seems pretty good. What we now need to do is put it under the microscope. And I thought, that's a figure of speech for something. I don't know what it is. It's got to be a figure of speech. So Chris walks off to the till over there, opens up the drawer and pulls out a bloody microscope. Took each item, put it under the microscope in order to see the density of the weave, the symmetry of it that I'd been telling him about, in order to confirm from his perspective that we weren't pulling the wool. Fortunately we weren't, and from that point onwards, Up and Under then became our first stockist. And during the last 12 months, we brought on board another 3, all of them similar to Up and Under in terms of being very small, very focused independent specialists. And we brought on board another 4 this year as well. So we have grown in the last 12-13 months, although in terms of how we're distributing, we are very deliberately staying away from making it any more widespread at this stage. We don't want to be in every single high street outlet for a whole host of reasons. So in a nutshell, that's where we are, and that's how we got here. So I just lost my train of thought there. Excuse me. Having given you the story, what I think I'll do now is just go through the product in the range, and just try and bring to life, I think, some of the features that, from our perspective, I think just give it a bit of edge, make it a little bit different to some of the other product that's out there. Ultimately, there's a limit to how much you can differentiate when you are designing clothing. Ultimately, a jacket needs to have 2 arms and a hood. and a pair of trousers still needs to have two legs to it, so we're not going to change that. But in terms of an aesthetic, in terms of technology, in terms of attention to detail, these are things that we very much take to heart, and I think if you were to somehow cut Jottnar in half, there would be like a piece of rock. There would be, I would like to think, an attention to detail running through every product if you were to dissect it in that way. There would be, from an aesthetic perspective, a streamlinedness to everything that we've done, a stripping away of fuss and a clutter. And I think you'd see a quality threshold in everything that we've made, where we have tried as much as is possible with the technology available to produce garments that, in what is a very competitive space, that definitely stand on their own 2 feet.